Hi everybody, welcome to our artist talk for the Bannister Gallery exhibition Richard Whitten, Objects of Wonder. I'm Victoria Gao, I'm the director of the Bannister Art Gallery, and here's Professor Richard Whitten, professor of art professor of painting in the art department. And you've been here for quite a few years now.
05.
05.
And then earlier, 91, 2, somewhere back there. Yeah. Stephen was on the committee. Yeah.
So I will let you take over.
Okay, great. Thank you for coming on this rainy day. It had to wait and rain on the day that I had this talk, of course. I mean, we need the rain, but, well, that's what happens. But okay, let's have the next slide. Okay, so the question that everybody asks, although they didn't ask it at the opening, that was really fascinating, but they usually always ask, how do you get an idea? And that's a terrible question, because really, there's no way to make a painting today that hasn't been affected by pretty much everything you did way back to the ancient days with dinosaurs. However, Stephen, he's got like amphibians, you know. I'm back with the dinosaurs. But so this is grad, and on the right, I have my trusty mouse, okay, is something that's relatively recent. You can recognize that it's similar to what's in the gallery. And you'd say, wow, that's quite different. But actually, it isn't so different. Because when people start and people really get an idea of what they're doing in work, they've pared everything down to something very, very simple. And for me, that simple thing was, how do I make a painting, which is still, look like it's moving or express motion? And so in grad school, I was trying to get these, as I call them, flying blocks, and that's exactly what they are, flying blocks, to move around like that. And that's all I wanted. I had a couple other things. I wanted to look down into this hole, and I wanted to look back into that space. But really, motion was the thing. And in here, we have this machine that implies motion because it could move. We also have another machine that could move up here. And so it's motion with a different sort of twist, one through recognition, the other one through implication. Okay. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay. So why motion? My gastroenterologist is here. You'll be seeing me soon. But okay, so what got me interested in motion? I was involved with this truly esoteric sport. I flew indoor model airplanes, and it was an international competition. The planes were, by the way, that is me. Guess that? It's got this weird stuff on the top of my head, and you can even see the time. Look at that. I was a little late cutting those off. That was really awful. Yeah, the barber just one day went, and I went, oh my God, it looks so much better. But okay, so this thing is 65 centimeters wide, and it actually weighs a gram. In fact, it's a minimum of a gram, because we could have built these things down to 0.6 grams. And there's actually a little rubber band here with about 2,200 turns in it, and they fly for over half an hour. My best time was 36 minutes, 19 seconds, 0.2. And the thing is, they flew about that fast. And the propellers went at the beginning at about 3/4 of a rotation per second, and at the end about half of a rotation per second. And so it was a slow, counterclockwise movement that would go up to the top of whatever building we were flying in, and I would set the number of winds to stop so that it maxed out at the top and then would come down. That's how we got our time. It was an international competition. I was 19 or so, and I was competing with Caltech professors and MIT professors and aerodynamic engineers. And I was pretty happy to make 16th. Okay, not bad for a 19-year-old. But it was amazing because the thing was, it was this slow motion. It was silent. There was no movement in the air. And it was almost like gravity stopped. Time stopped. And I was just like moving up, and it was just hypnotizing. And I think I felt like it was the most wonderful feeling ever. And I realized that that's part of what I wanted to share. And it gave me an interest in that kind of movement. It gave me an interest in the mechanical things that I was making, these delicate things, and it gave me an interest in the spaces that I was in. Because we would fly, that's a low library rotunda. McKim, Mead, and White, he designed the State House before he got killed in a duel over an extramarital affair. And then dirigible hangars, wonderful, wonderful spaces. Next, please. Right, so undergrad. I'm having a little bit of a preamble here. The thing about these slideshows is that they make it look like your life has been blessed and everything went easy. Because you show all your successes. You don't show your failures. And I'm not going to show you my failures either, but I'm going to talk about them. Because as an undergrad, I remember this one course. I actually was an economics major, and I had a very good economics degree. I was going to go to U Chicago. They had it slated that I was going to go to U Chicago, get my doctorate, come back, teach at Yale, go off, get my tenure somewhere else, come back, and they had it mapped out. I was going to be a Yale professor in economics. And I didn't want to. I didn't really want to. I presented my work at Harvard, and it was like, this is going to be a rat race. I just don't want to do it. And I wanted to paint. And so I was taking painting classes. I recreated an undergrad career, and the professors were wonderful. They were really, most of them. Bailey wasn't. Most of them were very, very inviting and very helpful. And I went to this grad seminar on drawing, and it was 8 hours a week, 2 4-hour days with Chuck O'Connor, and we did nothing but critique. And I would bring in 2 new 30 by 40 inch drawings every class, and he'd go around the room and skip me. And he'd go around the room and skip me. And you have to realize that this went on for 28 classes. And on the 29th class, he actually talked to me for 5 minutes. And on the 30th class, he did a half hour. And that was amazing. And so it wasn't discouraging. For me, it propelled me to do better. And I've got to tell you, the drawings at the beginning sucked. And at the end, they were interesting. And they had pared down all those interests so that it was just about movement. And it was just about line. It was just black and white. And after that, I slowly added stuff back. I added color, and I started making paintings like this. So you can, and I'll also mention, I didn't like painting when I grew up. I went to the Met every weekend. I didn't go to the Yankees, I went to the Met. Well, the Met, not the Mets. And I just thought paintings were pictures of things. And sculpture was solid, it was real. But then I found abstract expressionism, and it was like, oh, it's just paint. And it's like thin sculpture. And it's easier to store than sculpture. And so I made these abstract paintings that were all about mark making, but also shapes that would move. So I called this one Pink Wing and Pink Ice sometimes. You know, the titles, they can change. And then as time went on, the shapes became harder, more geometric, more sort of connected. And so I was working with these shapes that were like pieces of paper that folded over, and they're textured. I was also looking at illuminated manuscripts and Madonnas and children, or the Madonna and Child, but from the 1400s and 1300s, and there was all this gold and black. And you say, why not blue? Because it's supposed to be blue, right? It's the outside of the cloak. Well, if your patron in those days was cheap, they didn't buy ultramarine. They bought a lead litharge called schmalz that turned black after 50 years. And so some of these paintings, that explains why all those Madonnas have black cloaks on. They're really supposed to be blue. But I didn't know that. So black became really interesting to me. And it was just this sort of weird thing that could take on a form, but also could take on the space of a whole, and could also just sort of be flat. So a couple down there. Next, please. History buff, or at least an art history buff. I'll go back to something. Way back when I was little, I was standing looking up at the sky with my dad, and I said, "Daddy, can I know everything?" And he said, "No, Richard, only God can know everything." I said, "Can I try?" And I said, "I guess you can." And I always have. But so anyway, art history has always been a real influence on all of my art, even when it's abstract. So if you take a look at this Tintoretto, and by the way, that is the Temptation of St. Anthony. You know, they're the temptations on the side, and the angel's coming down to save him. But there's this wonderful negative space. And if you think of it, we've got St. Anthony down here and the angel up there, and the negative space over there. Next again. But classical Western has not been the only source. Japanese prints has been a major source as well. And so we look at this painting, which is actually grad school, and we look at this print, and we see the same kind of large form pushing off the side, some sort of secondary space here. By the way, anybody that's been in my Design 1 class, the secondary space. I've said that a few times. And which we see over here, sort of backwards compared to that. It's not like perfect, but it's inspired by it. These things discover and change. Next, please. All right, grad school, I'm running through it relatively quickly. It was long in the sense of like a lot of stuff happened, but when in retrospect, it was short, which is always good, right? And so, flying blocks. If they're going to move, something's got to be still. You know, that's the kind of question. I'd always ask these like geometry questions of it, like, what's a painting? What, you know, if something moves, does something have to be still? So yeah, something had to be still. And I started to put them in interior spaces. Do you see that this is essentially a suggestion of a barrel vault, the inside of a cathedral? Okay? We still have that looking down. And then over here on the right, I'm looking at what would happen if I don't have to deal with a rectangle. And that was a cheesy one. I just sort of blocked out the paper and just let it stay blank. But it foreshadows things, doesn't it? Next, please. Okay. So there I was an abstract painter, and I was in New York teaching, and they'd given me this tiny little apartment so that I could afford a $12,000 salary, and which basically said that I could walk 5 blocks, because if I went any further, I would have spent my daily pay. And I was working at night. The apartment was maybe 6 feet wide by 9 feet long, but it had 13-foot ceilings. So I had this wonderful wall. I tacked stuff up on it and just went to town. And this is probably the first painting where I had a considered light source. And that was important, a considered light source. And the flying blocks, you see them up there, but I was really interested in making the space. And I remember being about 4/5 finished and saying, wow, that space is beautiful. And it moved me emotionally in a way that the flying blocks couldn't. Because you know what? Flying blocks are flying blocks. I mean, like, do any of you have attachments to flying blocks? It's like, I mean, I'm not emotionally attached to flying blocks, but I am emotionally attached to these huge spaces. This, by the way, is one of the places where I flew airplanes. This is in Akron. And there are pieces of the Akron and Macon. By the way, I think that you're looking at something that you're not allowed to see because these were secret airplanes at the time and we weren't supposed to photograph and all of that stuff. But, oh well, it's in a public lecture. Next, please. And so that moment when I said, that space created a sense of awe in me, made me go from being an abstract painter to a representational painter. And I felt that I was giving up the universality of abstract painting because it means the same to everybody, perhaps, which may not be that much, or maybe a lot, but the representational stuff, as long as you, the viewer, and I, the maker, have something in common, there's a connection. And I thought that that was really, really super important. You have to understand that I'm coming out of a time that didn't believe in subject matter, right? That was our time. Pure formalism. Thou shalt not make a subject matter. Thou shalt not be self-indulgent. Thou shalt not be emotional. Thou shalt not make shadows. Thou shalt not do anything round. Thou shalt all those thou shalt nots, because it was about abstract expressionism, which was just making paint and doing it there. So new discoveries. And that's what this lecture is going to be. It's going to be a whole series of discoveries. Because you know what? Discoveries don't stop. Okay? They don't stop. I'm finished grad school. Things are changing in the work. And this is a space painted the way that I was painting in grad school. Yes, there is a light source, but I'm kind of really hazy about like where the light's coming from on all of the walls. And I said, there's a science to this. There's some rules. And I looked at Canaletto, who's otherwise a boring painter, but really wonderful when you start to say, how does he use value? And all of these things, they're exactly what I'm teaching you guys in class. And this one to that one is a matter of about 3 months. And it's so amazing how, for me anyway, how that has light and solidity, and this one doesn't, comparatively. Next, please. Oh, and we all have sacred spots. This is in the Met. It's the Studiolo of Gubbio. It was Federico da Montefeltro's little room, and he was this one-eyed soldier that was very intelligent. And he always had these sideways portraits because the spear had come along like this and taken off this side of his face. And so he only showed this side. But anyway, these are made out of chips of wood. It's called intarsia. And it's like tiling. And the thing was, it had such spatial believability. And it was because the chips of wood had really distinct and clear light and dark differences, what we in the arts call value, okay? And so then if I said, if I can do that in color, I can have that same kind of believable space. And I try to go to this every time I go to the Met now. It's just sort of like, that's home. Next, please. Another thing that was problematic to me was, okay, I'm on a canvas. It's a rectangle. And I don't want to make a picture of architecture. I want it to somehow have a reality that's sculptural. If I just take it to the edge, like if I was taking a snapshot, it would be a picture. And so I tried to do this, and I said for a while, what I'm just going to do until I figure out something better is I'm just going to fill that in. Actually, this was nice. The Met had this wonderful show on Pompeian wall frescoes, and around their architectural things, they would just sort of like finger paint on the outside, or else it's paint that had been cracked away. And it was a wonderful texture. And so, okay, that's fine, but how am I going to get this to essentially be framed? How am I going to get this to frame itself? Because I didn't want to have to put a frame on the painting. I didn't want it to depend upon that frame to say, this is the division between this world and the world of the painting. Because that's what a frame is. That's its function. Okay. And so, again, another small image. This is 5 feet tall and 13 feet wide. And so this bit of painted tiling is here. And so it feels like it's real size. Okay? And so that was a way in to say, okay, this is the real size. This is right here on the surface. It's right in front of you. You can touch it if you dare. And don't touch it in front of me. But I can touch it. You can't. And then you can walk into the space. Next, please. And here's another version where I'm looking at illuminated manuscripts. And another format. Okay, so you can have a picture in here, but this sets you up so that this doesn't feel like it's just cropped off. You're cropping off inside, right? And then there's this wonderful thing of oh, you've got the flowers that are big, but this is really small. And so we have these flowers, which are that big around because this is 7.5 feet tall and 16 feet wide. Actually, it's 7'9". And it's my huge, huge miniature because this is about 7 by 5 per page. Next again. Okay. I come to Rhode Island. It's a small state. I make smaller paintings. but truthfully, I tried, again, with rectangles and canvases to have more of an interesting shape. And so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 canvases. And I found something easier. I started to work on wood panels. That is a wood panel. And I can shape it. Duh. Right, and then next again. Oh, actually, this is okay. And having that wood panel really made it feel physical to me. And there was this thing that I could do this to that said, this is the picture plane. Bum, 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 bum. Right? And behind the picture plane is the part of the world that's in the painting. There is the plane of the picture, and then there's your world. And it brought me back to one other of my youthful fascinations. And for those of you who don't know, artists just love to talk about the fact that they got these sort of weird fixations when they were about 13, right? And PBS in New York played this movie over and over and over again, and I thought it was the most wonderful thing that had ever happened. I still do. And because the other thing, too, is that I can understand the French in it because it's very simple French. Okay, but it's about the story of Orpheus, and Orpheus, you know, goes down into the underworld to find his dead wife. In this case, there's some complications about that. But Orpheus goes into the underworld by putting his hand through the mirror. And the angel there tells him the mirror is the entryway to the underworld, because every time you look at the mirror, you see death at work because you're older than the last time. And he passes his hands through the mirror. This, by the way, is a pool of mercury. That's how they did this effect in 1954. And that, I'm sure that's why the rubber gloves were there, but they put the hands through the mercury. There are these slow ripples, and he passes through into the underworld. And that's what I want my paintings to do for you. I want you to see this as a solid object, now that you've gone over to the gallery, one hopes, and you'll see that they're shaped, they're slightly set away from the wall, they're a sculpture, they're a thing. And then you see that plane, and then somewhere in there, you start to push past into that other world. And that's where I want you to feel it. That's where I want you to feel that wonderful sort of stillness and that I felt when I was flying airplanes. And I want to go back one slide. Notice this. Stephen, you'll enjoy it, because what do you say? See more?
Look harder.
Look harder. Look harder, see more? Mine is look and shut up. Thanks. Yeah. Number two. Yeah. Okay. So obviously, more study. More study. This time about what's in front of the picture plane. American artist John Pedo from about, oh gosh, now 150 years ago or so, 125. And yeah, just this wonderful illusion of what can be out in front of the picture plane. This is canvas. It's not a piece of wood, it's canvas. It's not carved into, it's just flat. That, the balls, the doors, and then the puncture into the space. Next, please. Okay. You come to this time when you start to run with things. Okay? So, about 3 years will pass with about 15 paintings. But one thing to mention here, an idée fixe. When I was in 7th grade, I was precocious, and I was interested in matriarchal familial systems and early sort of what's now called women's studies theories about early culture. And the school actually made really great accommodations for me. And they got this teacher to teach me. Actually, he steered me to Jung, and we started to read about Jungian psychology. And all this time, I wanted to be analyzed by a Jungian psychologist. And I took the advantage of grad school insurance and was analyzed by a Jungian. And we did these dream notebooks, and I found that water was this sort of like sense of like psychic energy and like creativity and imagination, and that fishing was this sort of symbol of going out and catching ideas. And that has come back again and again, usually in the form of a well in the paintings. Also, I'm afraid of heights. By the way, I'm supposed to stop here. That's why I stopped deadly. It's sort of like the cat that comes up, ooh, collar. But yeah, I'm afraid of heights. And so a lot of times when you go into that other world, there's a drop. Next, please. And something else to look at. This is a fresco by Salviati. This is a painting of a painting. This is a painting of architecture. You thought it was marble, but it's paint. These are painted to be real. The windows and the shutters are the only thing real up there. And so in this painting, you'll see that there are little hooks there. They're painted, of course, but hanging this space, so it's a painting hung within a painting. And the other thing, this is a fig motif, and this is like a fig logo designed by me. And but it was like different ways of seeing the same thing. Next again. And yeah, art history again. I'm looking at two Dutch interior painters, Sanredam on the left, Emmanuel de Witte on the right. And Sanredam is diagrammatic, and de Witte was emotional. And where's the emotion come from? It's not like he puts emotion paint in there. It's in the shadows. It's in the fact that he's like hidden things in shadows, and and that light and dark is so needing to be understood. And I've tried to do that. I'm not as good as that. I gotta admit it's like I'm not there, but next please. I really think the shadows are everything. And when you start to play with what happens in the shadow here, or in the shadow here, or even in this sort of mysterious black, like, that's important to me. That's what I don't know in the paintings. Because all of this is made up, and it's like, I can only go so far, and then I get to that point where I don't know yet. I actually last night had a great idea. Okay, I can have a window and I can have a shadow of something through the window. That would be interesting. I don't know. Next, please. I became full-time here, and even though I kind of needed to dig into savings to make my yearly costs, even though I was full-time, I built this because I cashed in on an investment that I had made, $5,000 investment back when I was 18. And I built my studio. So I'm painting in one of my paintings. Okay. And now it gave me a freedom to like make bigger paintings again. And you know, we always want to make these big paintings that you can't sell. And and it's just like wonderful shapes. So it was just wonderfully freeing, and wonderfully expensive. Next, please. So you go here and look at this. This is an architectural conceit. If anybody here is an architect, this is your plan form, and this is your section. In other words, this is your floor plan, but this is the picture of the space. Right? You see it curving around, and there you go. So that was kind of neat. Little games that I'm playing. You don't need to know them, but it is fun when you do. And you see the well again. Next again. Process. I draw. How can you not paint and draw? How can anybody say that I can paint, but I can't draw? No, I draw. And I draw, and I draw, and I'll keep drawing the same drawing, or on the same drawing. And this is a drawing that went for a good 4 to 5 years. And along with it, different paintings like came off it. So this drawing actually stopped here at one point or another, and this drawing was. And this painting was generated. Next, please. Then I continued it, and look at that, the spiral staircase pushes on. And why is this here? Because I'm interested in format again. I'm interested in orchestrating this shape of the outside with the shapes on the inside. Look at that insert, look at that cut, look at this insert. And it's like ways to explain the different sizes, ways to organize these disparate objects. Next, please. We're about 2005. Nick Capasso, who was a curator at the De Cordova, came to my studio and said, "Richard, your work looks like stage design. I want something to happen in it." And then he left. And I said, "Idiot." And and then but it bugged me, and I said, he probably is right. He's probably a museum director for some reason. And so I said, okay, I don't want to put people in it. Why not? Because if you put people in it, it becomes narrative, and somehow in my mind it diminishes it. Because I'm an only child, and this is my world, not yours. No, it's my world, and you can play in it. And I figure that you as the viewer can play in it. And if you're watching two people talk, it's like watching a movie. It's not like you participating. And so what could move but not be alive? A machine. Something of that sort. And so I started studying these Oh, and it was bad on eBay because it's like I always bought these things that I would paint. That's not a cheap item, by the way. It's a locomobile. It actually works. You put water in it, you burn it, and its steam goes and it moves around the room. And actually made in New Bedford. But I was interested in steam engines. I was interested in this case, mineshaft tops. And I have a moving thing. Something that implies movement, but doesn't. Next, please. And I run with it. And of course, I'm also dealing with things that fly. However, how does it move? It moves because you, the viewer, go in mentally and you touch it and you set it going. Next, please. More process. And my process is extensive. It's like, and it takes years because this is a little print. I actually made a print that I did in Ireland at the very end of a residency. I had 2 extra days and I was there with a friend, Utsi, right? And he said, make a print, Richard, make a print. And so I did. And I had this idea going. And I was like not really worried about it. And it sat around for 2 years, I think. I said, my career's not going anywhere right now. I'm just going to do something silly. And I said, okay, but if I'm going to do it, I need to do the perspective right. And this is too much for me to calculate. So I actually made the real thing. So I could calculate the perspective, and I could see the shadows and draw the shadows. Next, please. The draft, and there's actually a stage that's missing here. I make a small painting. And that's a big painting. By the way, scale. All of those undergrad paintings, 4.5 feet by 5.5 feet. They were all the size that I could carry. And since I was always carrying them like long distances, also the size that the wind couldn't blow away. Okay. Oh, and I later found out also the size that I could jam through a subway door. And but this is about 4.5 by almost 6. Okay. Now in the Crocker Museum, which is nice, Sacramento. Next, please. Do you notice that we get our source material from everywhere? Everything is grist for the mill because, you see it back there? Just, yep, there it is. Okay, and here's another thing. Most everybody, and at times I do, make the thing before the painting, but oftentimes I make the painting first and say, hey, wouldn't it be fun to make the thing? So you know what? This is the real thing. This is the illustration. Next, please. Oh, yeah. It keeps going, right? The object, the painting. Next again. Object and painting. Next. Object and part of the object into the painting. Okay? And again. And some things that are suggested, right? And that actually does work into this, but this is suggested by those shapes. Odd thing about this painting, and I'm going to give it a little press or time because, you know, it feels bad that it's not in this show. But it's called Delschow and Bumblebee. And Delschow was a crazy person who lived in Texas, and he thought that he was the first person to have been abducted by aliens in 1915. And he was a postman. It always seems to be postman, right? And he made all of these strange drawings of these alien contraptions that flew or dirigibles that flew and the aliens would come down. Never did make pictures of aliens, and I'm glad about that because those are always really bad drawings. Next, please. That's the backside. And you can see how big it is. And yes, my students always say, yes, Richard, you have a very, very bougie studio. Next, please. Okay. Detail. I always forget about the detail because you know what? I know my paintings. And so when people see them in the internet or whatever, they look like posters. You can't see that they're made out of paint. You can't see the different layers of paint. You can't see the different surfaces. And it's only when you get up to this big that you suddenly say, oh, it's like an abstract expressionist painting. It's just that it's just this big, right? And people say, wow, gosh, look at all of that. Those marks, tiny little marks. And yes, they are tiny because, you know, see this mark? That's made with a 4-0 round brush, for those of you who know it. It is maybe a little, it's in between a 64th and a 32nd of an inch in diameter. It's nasty. Next, please. We're going to come to a secondary idea. You get these ideas, and for a while you push them off and say, they don't fit into what I do. They don't fit into who I am. But I was really interested in games and what games could be in terms of painting. Because you know what? Things like the dexterity games that we used to have, which are the little boxes with ball bearings, you can't touch the ball bearings, but you've got to move it. And that's kind of what I want to do with a painting, right? You can't touch the painting, but I want you to move it. And so I went directly to that. And to somebody that actually did mind that idea. Joseph Cornell on the left, and then this little game of mine on the right. A double meaning on this one, you know that this is Albrecht Dürer's little magic number thing, but it's also a Chinese way to organize urban planning. 12th century versus 15th. Right, okay, next please. And then this thing. That thing I felt was part of my paintings, but this was like truly separate. I saw this beautiful little brass frame with a glass in it, and in an antique store, and I just bought it. And then I put a painting behind it and made it into literally a box. There's a little space. It is a painted ball. It's not a real ball, but it is like one of these things with the glass in front of it. It's very literal. Next again. So now we run with this. Lots of little small paintings, lots of new ideas. And at first, just trying to get things into the holes, then starting to fold the surface, next again, and then starting to curve the surface. By the way, this is the side view, so that this is the side. You see all of that like extra color and activity, which you can't see from the front. So again, I'm really starting to think of these as three-dimensional objects. And I know when I look at it as a slide, that does look like it's curved, doesn't it? But it's flat. I just have to say it, it's flat. Next, please. There I am. And a notebook drawing. Notebooks are really important. First thing out of the shower, you run to the notebook and put down an idea. 12 out of 13 are really awful. And maybe 1 out of 20 becomes a painting, but they're there. And putting them down makes you know that they're good or bad. And then you work out I work out something that's fairly detailed and has a good sense of the light and dark. And this jumps a stage, but you can see that it will go right onto that board. Next, please. There is a detailed drawing so that I can make that object. Needed this for the perspective here. Okay, the small version of the painting and the big version of the painting that you'll see in the gallery. Next again. Ideas galore. I think that I am now up to 73 or so paintings that I'm working on all at once. This is a heavy semester. It should only be around 70. But right now this is a heavy semester, a lot of teaching, a lot of meetings. So some of these have been done, like I finished that one. This one I can never finish. Bill, you know that thing has been sticking around forever. This one's done in a different version, this one's part done, this one's part done, that one's sold. This one's gone. I mean, this one never actually happened, and that one is waiting to be done. Next, please. And you have these sort of questions. What would happen if you took a painting and just sort of cut it like this? Like, what would it look like on the side? And so that's what I did. And by the way, what happens is that you get the colors all wrapping all the way through. Okay? Okay. Next again. Double ways of understanding the world. I wrote about this for this show, but I'll mention it again. This is an image of the world, or at least of the solar system. This is an image of the world. A really interesting one. I mean, how many of you noticed it? Like, we've got sun down here, but we've got stars up there. Right? Yeah. It's a lot that you can sort of like do with sleight of hand and painting. But this is painted to look like it's painted. This is painted to look like you can grab it and pick it up. You see, there's a difference there. And it does two things. It makes you think twice about the subject matter, and it allows you to know how good a painter I am. Next, please. So there, we're running with this again. More ideas, more paintings, yes. And we come to the final run. I'm working on a project, and I invite you to the show in November. It is with my colleague Doug Bosch. We both chose 6 scientific objects from the Museo Galileo, which is the Museum of the History of Science in Florence. These are the 6. And we're both making pieces about these, and then 6 pieces that we made up. Okay. So I decided to make an illuminated manuscript. It is wood, it's painting, but it's supposedly a catalog that was lost. And of the 6 objects and the 6 objects of mine, they have catalog numbers. I've researched the numbers. They have the right typeface for the time when they were acquired by the museum. They suck up to the right owner of Florence of the time. Some are for the Medici, some are for the House of Lorraine, some are for the Habsburgs, but they're there. Next, please. The drawings, you can see, actually, like here, this is for the House of Lorraine, this is the Medici. Some of the Medici balls are early, so that they're just balls, and some of them actually have the blue ball with the crest of France, the fleur-de-lis, which they really didn't deserve, they just sort of like bought. Next again. More drawings, and again. This is where it was about June, right before I got my concussion. And now, this is about a month ago. Okay. Can we go on? And now we're going to have you watch a little video. Go. Does it work? So, I'm going to tell you that the most difficult thing in setting up a lecture is figuring out how to start. Once you're rolling, you're just rolling. And so I did consider this. I found this image. I forgot that it even existed. But here I am. This is 3-year-old Richard in the Guggenheim with his painting back up there on the 5th level. Yeah, right. It's a Kandinsky, but it is me. But yeah, I did live in the museums when I was little. And that's it.